Neighbor kids keep trespassing on my property, so I traumatize them from doing it again. Here's what happened. Subscribe to Am I the Jerk on YouTube and hit the bell for notifications. Me and my now fiancé have lived in this house and neighborhood for a few months now. I have a 1-year-old son myself, so I know how kids can be. However, my neighbors have 3 children, a 9-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 14-year-old. All of them are boys. At first, they weren't too much trouble. I would just see them running around, throwing sticks and riding scooters across the street. But as of recently, they had started getting a lot closer to my property. This all started with the older one throwing various trash into our yard that my fiancé would continually have to pick up. Then, all 3 children started digging holes in our yard, banging on the door, and I even caught one of them trying to lockpick my front door with a bobby pin. This had happened 4 to 5 times already. Of course, I brought this up to their mother, who has done little about it. They seem to have very little supervision, and apparently CPS had already been called numerous times because of how often they seem to be left alone. I warned the mother that we have 2 big dogs, whose sole purpose was to protect against intruders. So if their sons happened to actually get into my house, they would probably end up hurt. I didn't want these little children to get hurt, of course, which was why I was warning her. She brushed it off, saying if anything happened to her boys, she'd have me promptly arrested and my dogs put down. So I decided to take matters into my own hands to ensure the safety of the boys. As expected, the oldest one and his brothers were sneaking around my yard again. I waited until they got close to my front door. When the second youngest opened the door, I said a command to my dogs and they immediately ran out, barking and growling. All the boys screamed and started yelling. They ran and ran all the way until they got back to their house, getting wet by the lawn sprinklers on the way. I called my dogs back. They stopped at the end of the lawn like I had trained them to, and we didn't hear much for a few days. Until their mother and the police came knocking at the door. She said some stuff about how my dogs bit her children, and I was a danger to the neighbors. But I showed the security footage from my camera to the police, and it pretty much died down from there. She's still trying to keep the case open, but I feel as if I've done little to no wrong. Her boys don't bother us anymore, and her children aren't hurt and were never going to be. So, am I the jerk? It doesn't sound like you really sicked the dogs on them or anything, just got them to bark a little bit, which seems to have been enough for the kids to learn their lesson at least. Now, if you had told the dogs to get aggressive towards the children, even if they are entering your house, that's where I would have an issue, because it's not necessary. You were home when they were screwing around, you could have addressed the problem yourself. In this case though, it seems like you just wanted them to learn they're not supposed to be messing with other people's property, especially trying to break in. That message, I think, was received loud and clear. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below. And don't forget to subscribe. Jerk coworker doesn't want anyone physically interfering with his space, so I make sure he gets bombarded with sound for 8 hours a day. I've had a long, respectable career in game development. A couple years ago, I've abandoned it for a cushy corporate job, and now spend most of my days missing game dev. This story takes place about 10 years ago at the apex of my career. I was the lead on a AAA project. Our parent company, for which video games was just many lines of business, was going through changes. We had to move offices 3 times in 1 year. The second of the 3 moves, always intended to be temporary, put us in the basement of an older building long occupied by satellite departments not involved with development. The basement we were given had been empty for years, save for the most distant office. You entered the basement through a dimly lit staircase. Then, after you snaked through a horror movie-like maze of corridors and interconnected small rooms, you'd eventually arrive at the farthest room of all. A golden plaque was on the door. Trademark Compliance Department. Literally no one I knew was ever aware of trademark compliance, even though trademarks were a pretty important part of everything we did, the department consisted of a single elderly trademark attorney and his fresh-faced college grad assistant slash paralegal slash whatever. The lawyer flipped his lid when he learned people were being moved into his basement. For a couple weeks, he tried desperately to prevent the move, getting all the way to the CEO. The tiny, leathery lawyer amazed everyone with his deep, booming voice that would climb and climb and climb in pitch as he yelled and screamed and threatened. So, all his efforts being for naught, our stuff was moved into the basement over one weekend. We spent the following Monday and Tuesday dealing with all sorts of setup woes, electrical outlets, network connections, and breathable air. On Wednesday, two quiet 2D artists came into their L-shaped room, the one with the fancy door to trademark compliance, and found that all their stuff, chairs, desks, computers, everything was pushed into the far corner. A walkway of caution tape was set up leading to the compliance door. While we were trying to figure out what the heck happened, a demigod VP, as close to the company CEO as it gets, walked into our lowly basement trailed by the beaming lawyer. Apparently our desks blocked his door. He even had pictures. The demigod hadn't seen them prior to walking down. Once he saw dozens and dozens of close-ups of the desk corner, the VP's face grew less certain. Our desk was blocking his doorway by less than an inch on the side with the hinges. The door opened away from the desk. I'm guessing even when open at 90 degrees, the edge of the door was about as wide as the protruding part of the desk. In other words, it was technically blocking the doorway, but no more than the door itself. Non-committal as always, the demigod instructed us to make sure all pathways were clear at all times, and that he expected this would be his last time he had to get involved. I'm generally a people pleaser. I can even maybe sympathize with an old guy freaking out when a gaggle of man-children in ironic t-shirts wreck his long-established way of life. I figured it was time to modify the seating chart. 2 people would be a pretty tight fit for that weird room, and I also didn't want my quiet flower child artists anywhere near that loon. I apologized to the lawyer and told him I was moving 2 people out and moving just 1 person in, making sure it was as uncluttered as possible. I had 2 potential candidates in mind, and while leaning strongly towards one, I considered a milder option in case the lawyer turned out to be an alright guy after all. The lawyer answered my apology with a triumphant, "Serves you right," and "That's what you get for messing with adults," and "Welcome to the real world," and "This is far from over." He then ordered me to wait right here, and came out with a tape measure. We snaked through his entire path from the staircase to his office, measuring clearance from desks and chairs and people's items, and the lawyer booped desks and monitors and garbage cans and pushed people sitting in their chairs as if they were garbage cans. He crawled on the floor and marked out no man's land in chalk. No one was ever allowed to block his pathway, or "I'll have everyone's jobs." Since all the lines were drawn and the lawyer retreated to his fortress of smugness, I knew our slightly unhinged physics programmer with his anime posters and the loud clank of his mechanical keyboard would not be moving to the room after all. My revenge was going pro. Now, the issue of sound was discussed more than any other as we were planning the temporary move. Our sound designer had to listen to all sorts of sounds at full volume on different types of speakers, not just on his headphones. If sound was designed on headphones and you played it on surround speakers, you'd sense it. Our old office had a professionally soundproofed room. Even then, that was a pretty unpleasant thing. Huge sounds couldn't be heard but could be felt, like an audible earthquake. It struck you with primal dread. So we discussed this on and on. I wanted a soundproof room. Management wanted headphones. We eventually agreed on a compromise. We just have to accept screams and explosions on speakers while we're in the basement. This decision had also been made and approved by the same VP about a month before the walkway and chalk incident. You already see where I'm going with this. We made the walkway semi-permanent with construction tape. I took pictures and sent an email update to everyone reporting that A, we pledged to keep all pathways clear at all times, and B, the offending room would have the 2 girls move out and only have the sound designer move in. VP replied, "Thank you, that's great." See how the email listed the sound designer in an offhand way? This was not my first rodeo. We moved the sound designer and all his equipment into the room. The next morning, explosions started, then stopped. High-pitched screams erupted in the distance, followed by footsteps. My door flew open, and the lawyer ran in screaming, "What the?" F! He dragged me across the street to the VP's office. VP wasn't there. The lawyer screamed and jumped and stomped his little feet, left voicemails, then retreated to write an email to the VP, with CC list possibly going all the way up to President Obama and the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. I quickly replied that 1. Sound design issues had been extensively discussed and were deemed a necessary evil. 2. I notified everyone before the fact the sound designer was moving to that particular room. And 3. If I had to keep people moving around every day, I wouldn't be able to hit my milestones. VP replied the next morning, saying, "He's right about the milestones. Besides, it's temporary anyway." And so for the next 7 months, compliance department was subjected to 8 hours a day of non-stop explosions, gunfire, screams, grunts, engine roar, and wet thuds. Once released, our game's sound was singled out for praise in multiple reviews. I put the lawyer's name somewhere in the midst of the thank you section in the credits. I mean, you gotta get the job done, I guess. Everyone's gotta make compromises, my friend. He was more concerned about his physical space than he was the actual sound, apparently. But our original poster did everything they had to do, took all the necessary steps and got the approval they needed, sent it out in an email. What else do you want him to do? This game's gotta get made, and part of that is the sound. This is the situation we have to deal with. I'm sure all the other employees around weren't happy about it either, but knowing that guy was the least happy, I'm sure made things a little bit easier. Karen thinks I'm not handicapped because of my hair color. First, let me tell you, I have both failing knees and hips, the joys of getting older, and I now have to walk with a cane anytime I'm outside of my home environment. Last year, my primary doctor told me I would definitely be considered handicapped by the legal definition, so she handed me a filled-out form for my handicapped parking placards. Also, as I haven't had a regular job in over 10 years, I've taken to dyeing my hair in non-standard colors, usually green. Now, onto the story. I pulled into a handicap parking space at my local Hy-Vee, a local grocery store chain in the Midwest. And as I was reaching down next to me for my handicap placard and my cane, there's a rapping on my window. I open my window just enough to talk. After all, I don't know who this Karen is or what she wants, and she's practically leaning on my door looking at me. Once the window's open an inch, she yells at me, "You can't park here, you aren't handicapped." I finish grabbing my placard and place it on my rearview mirror and say, "Well, clearly my doctor and the state think I'm handicapped enough to need this placard." Karen then stammers out, "But a youngster like you with your green hair can't be handicapped." I shook my head at her and pulled out my cane in my purse, closing my window. And as I opened my door, my carbon fiber and steel leg brace becomes visible as well. Karen then turns beet red and departs, and thankfully peace returns. Believe it or not, things like age and hair color don't necessarily mean you're not handicapped. There's plenty of young people with colorful hair that are handicapped. Karen kinda came onto this one a little too aggressively. If she had bothered to wait 5 seconds for the person to actually get out of the car, then it would have been pretty clear that that person needs that spot, and she could have saved herself a little bit of embarrassment. My mother-in-law's boss didn't recognize her when she showed up to work in a dress. This is my mother-in-law's story, not mine, but it was a really good one, so I wanted to share. My mother-in-law's a short, fat, busty woman in her 50s and works in security. Yes, she looks like a sweet older lady, but she's tough and thorough and will threaten to place you under arrest. Her lead supervisor is old, senile, and gets in his own way. Despite a high turnover rate due to not the best management skills, as trying to become an armed guard is as easy as pulling teeth, my mother-in-law has endured, as this has been her first job in 26 years after raising her son as a stay-at-home wife in extreme poverty. People have rage quit due to how Brian tends to upset and confuse and change schedules without notice, literally telling his security offers to call him corporal in front of police officers, and to watch Red Dawn as training. Also, you can get written up if you alert him your coworker left their gun in plain sight in their locked car, as a courtesy. You can't make this up. Despite this, she endures, as it's far better than the alternative. Anyway, for our cast, we have Jane, my mother-in-law, Brian, the elderly supervisor, and Bob, the other supervisor. As this was told to me, it's not word for word, but a rough summary as to what happened. Jane was wearing a yellow and red flowered dress running errands and had to stop by security home office to do something. Not sure what, but she figured she was out and thought it was best to get whatever she needed to do out of the way. She goes and finds Bob, one of the primary supervisors that manage most operations. He greets Jane and likes my mother-in-law because of the work he's seen out on sites. They move further into the office and Brian comes up, sees Bob, then sees Jane. Brian tells Jane, Ma'am, you can't be in here. This office is closed. Bob speaks up and tells Brian, No, it's all right. She's with me. Brian's eyebrows wiggle and says, Oh, she's with you, huh? What? Everyone was confused. My mother-in-law and Bob then laugh. It was clear a while ago Brian has never been all too observant. In spite of working in security, despite talking face-to-face with her numerous times in her year with the company, Brian didn't recognize his own employee outside her uniform. Evidently, by this encounter, Jane was in clear disguise and took on the identity of a strange woman walking into a security office like a wandering idiot who happened to be holding casual conversation with his co-supervisor. Bob goes, Brian, this is Jane. It finally clicked. Oh, hey! Anyway, it's a bit anticlimactic, but everyone thought it was funny, including I think Brian. It just worries me a bit more, as it makes me wonder what else goes over this guy's head. With all due respect to Brian, I'm sure he was good at this job a long time ago, but maybe it's time to hang up your hat. He seems to be struggling with pretty much every aspect of the job. While I feel bad for his employees, this instance was just kind of a funny interaction. Not a big deal. Anyone who's ever worked a job where you wear a uniform and then see someone outside of work not wearing a uniform, you know it feels a little weird. Like a fish out of water situation. And you might not recognize them right away. In this instance, though, they'd been working together for a year, so I feel like he should have known who she was. We'll just chalk it up to old age. My aunt thought it was appropriate to body shame me on Facebook, so I decided to fire back. My son and his friend put up a tire swing in the yard for my grandchild. I posted a picture of me swinging on it on Facebook. My aunt, my dad's sister, commented on it saying, I hate skinny people. I'm not one for Facebook drama, so instead of commenting back, I called her. I basically said I don't talk about her watermelon butt, so she shouldn't be talking about my weight. Now all my aunts, all 5 of them, are mad at me because apparently skinny people can't be body shamed, and that I should have told her first that I don't like those comments instead of straight out calling her out on her watermelon butt like I did. I don't think I'm the jerk because it's not like I told her that I'm skinny because my sister and I have always exercised more so we didn't inherit the family watermelon butt. But skinny is also something I didn't really have to work for. It's just how I am. See, this is one of those situations where tone could be everything. We're reading this in text form. That comment could sound very snarky from our original poster's point of view. I hate skinny people. See, it doesn't feel great being on the receiving end of that. But if the aunt was saying it more in a joking manner, I hate skinny people. It's kind of more of a compliment, I guess, because it's more envious of you, but I don't know. I don't think we needed to fire back quite so hard. You could have just addressed the fact that you don't like having comments made about your body, same as she wouldn't, and it's something that she needs to take into consideration in the future. This is the problem with text messages, though. You miss that tone, and tone can mean everything. Some jerk parked his Corvette taking up 4 spots, so I left a note on his windshield. I was trying to find a parking spot at my university. The lot was notoriously crowded, but my campus didn't have a lot of options. While searching, I saw a Corvette taking up 4 prime spots near the front of the lot. After about 10 minutes of waiting and looking for a spot, one opened up towards the back. Furious at the nerve of the driver being so inconsiderate, I wrote a note saying, "Sorry I hit your car. You probably won't even notice the damage," and left it on the windshield. When I got out of class and was headed back to my car, I saw a very stereotypical college-aged Corvette owner frantically searching their vehicle while yelling into their phone. I don't know who they were talking to, but I feel bad for them having to deal with this person. It was probably mommy and daddy who paid for the car to begin with. I get it, you have a nice car and you don't want anything to happen to it. But I hate to break it to you, buddy, you're not 4 times more valuable than everyone else. They deserve a spot same as you. And when you do stuff like that, you're asking for people to mess with your car. You're lucky this guy just put a note on the windshield and didn't key it or something. Cause that's the kind of retaliation you're asking for. If you're gonna treat other people like they're crap, they're gonna act like crap. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. Or if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out Easy Mode. If you like Am I the Jerk, give Am I the Genius a shot. Everything linked in the description.